All right. Hello. Let's see. William, can you hear me?
Yes. Good morning.
Excellent. We're coming through. I'm going to turn your volume up a little bit in the room. Loud noise. Okay. Welcome for everyone here in Schaumburg. Hope you've enjoyed the show. All of the presentations in this room are also part of the NNP Symposium, which is a virtual educational conference we've been doing since 2020. This is our first hybrid event where we have an in-person component as well. So all of these are being recorded. And for those of you watching online, they are also being live streamed, of course. Welcome back. I'm guessing most of you online have been to a symposium before and know the drill. So I won't take too long here. For this presentation, we are joined by William Nyberg, who will be talking about Robert Scot's engraving history. One of our earlier presenters actually referenced his work on Robert Scot, so maybe someone's here from that one. William Nyberg is also the author of the book, Robert Scot, Engraving Liberty, which is the first biography of Robert Scot. So we have an expert on the subject with us. And with that, I will turn it over to him.
Thank you, Leanna, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining in. I'll start a little bit about my collecting history. I've been collecting coins for a long time, since I was 7, and I still have some of those albums. After college, got into early type, and then eventually got into attributing that type for die marriages. And in doing that, I bought some reference books, the Overton, the Browning reprint, the dime book, and just got more pulled into that area of collecting and joined the JRCS, eventually joined EAC, started getting more interested in the technology, the people that made the coins, and why they made them, and how they were different. And everything started to make sense. There we go. Everything started making sense about the processes and so on, the people, except for one person, and that was Robert Scot. There was very little fact-based information about Scot. The secondary sources were often speculative opinion. He was often criticized, and a few people praised him, but it was more criticism, I think. And I think that was just from the lack of information about him. So that compelled me to get into it and start researching his background. And where do you go when you don't have any place to start? Well, a good place is a U.S. Mint records, and I went through virtually everything that was through 1825, manuscript collections, which are basically unpublished letters, business and government records. It required a lot of on-site research. I looked at Roger's presentation, and he said, yeah, you've got to be on site because this stuff is not online. You have to sort through a lot of loose records. So most of that was done in Philadelphia, different places, also Virginia. Bought some antiquarian books that had Scot engravings, spent a year reading newspaper microfilm, which is actually very interesting. And Scot advertised a lot in newspapers. I need to also say that I made the decision about 2006 to write a book. The early research was initially for my own purpose, and I found so much that I felt that a book was the only way to do it justice. And that was 2006, and well, 9 years later, it was out. Secondary sources are generally not as good. The most important thing is to look at the sources that they used, and oftentimes there were no sources. They were just opinions. I listed some good secondary sources. I won't go into detail in these. This will be on the NMP, so it's also in my book, those sources. The last line there I think is important. Good secondary sources always give primary sources that they use that enable research expansion. So I bought books that had nothing to do with numismatics or even Robert Scot, but they dealt with publishing in the United States, and I was able to use their sources, primary sources, and make the connection between that and Robert Scot, and in some cases, publishing and the Mint. Everything is all interconnected back then, one way or the other. So let's launch into his life. He was born in Canongate, Scotland, United Kingdom, October 2nd, 1745. It was annexed into Edinburgh in 1856. He dropped a T in America on his name, and also in a couple slides I'll show that it was a little bit earlier than that. His father was a baker, or Baxter as they are known in Scotland. His mother was Allison, and this is the original birth record, and I had a lot of help with that, and with the Scottish archivist. We cross-checked it different ways because lots of Robert Scots, and this no doubt is the real Robert Scot for engraved at the mint. It has a couple of Baxter friends that were witnesses to his baptism, and that's at the Kirk of Canongate, which is a Presbyterian church. So Robert Scot had the honor of being pupil to Richard Cooper Sr. He was a Canongate engraver and instructor, and he actually started the first art academy in Scotland in 1729, and that evolved into the Trustees Academy of Edinburgh, University of Edinburgh, and it's still active. And that's where he was educated and trained. And that's a quote from his own words, Engraving in all its branches, early in the United States, in one of his ads. And it's evident that he knew copperplate line engraving, both artistic and scientific, paper money engraving, seal dies, silver and bronze cast metals, copperplate printing, and plaster modeling. And I use the British spelling of plaster and modeling. There was a book written in the United States in 1899 that spelled modeling that way, and that's why I spelled it in my book that way, right or wrong. The next two slides are new since the book, and I think these are really important because it explains why he came to America. Robert Scot partnered with Carnegie McLean in 1764 to start an engraving and plaster modeling business. And it was located on Nidri Wynd, which is now a street. A Wynd is just a narrow lane, very narrow street. And I actually Googled it, and you could zoom in for a street view and do a virtual tour of it. Pretty neat. Right by the university there, and they did copperplate engraving and plaster modeling of classical figure heads for architectural artwork. And this data came to me in 2017. I collaborated with a researcher there, Joe Rock, who's probably the most knowledgeable on 18th century engravers in Scotland. And I'll never forget the email. He said, "It's in the dust of centuries." It hadn't been looked at probably since it was filed away. Robert Scot, there's one T. Robert Scot and Carnegie McLean engravers. This is some of their inventory: 2 plaster heads and 2 brackets. The brackets were used to mount the heads on walls of houses and buildings. And these were classical designs. These were Apollo, as I mentioned, Apollo and the Seasons. 2 lions, Apollo, Venus, and that was part of the neoclassical revival of art in Europe, which eventually spread to the United States. And the Greek sculptors were incredible, and as far as their scale, symmetry, accuracy, and it's not surprising that it was revived. The last paragraph here is from their landlord, and Robert said, "I skilled Robert Scot with 2 T's," and go figure. Carnegie McLean engravers in Edinburgh. It took a foreshop and back shop, Nidri Wynd for me on Whitsunday, 1764. Whitsunday is 1765. I understand Whitsunday is 7 weeks after Easter, so they did apparently agreed on a full year lease or rental. And you don't want to, in Scotland, you don't want to get behind in your rent. If I didn't mention, I need to mention that McLean was 26 years old and Scot was 18 years old at the time that they started. And and I think it's obvious that McLean would have been the primary partner and handled a lot of the money and pulled Robert Scot in for his ambition and talent and everything else. And the last part of the sentence there, and you don't want to get behind your rent, and they are now in prison, or both in prison. So they got off to a rocky start there. From what I could tell from the 4 pages of documents I received, that he spent about 1 to 2 months in the old Edinburgh Toll prison, which is a bad place. It is bad. Torture was routinely carried out. There was no sound. There was a historian who did a report right after Scot had left, and there was no sanitation. The human waste was piled up, and they did that intentionally. I could go on. There was intentional starvation and things like that. But they were lucky to get out, and there was a picture of the prison, a haunted looking place there, right across the street from St. Giles Cathedral, and of course you got the public execution platform there. I collaborate with a historian, Richard Shearer, who's very knowledgeable in 18th century publications from Scotland to America. And he said, yeah, that's why Scot came to America. It would have been difficult for him to reestablish himself. And he spent the rest of his time apparently working for other publishing owners or larger engraving firms, and that's why you don't see any sign names engraving from Robert in Scotland. And here's where his father, Freedom, fortunately, he did that, or it would have been in there a long time, settled and paid. It looks like it's just 2 or 3 months back rent. And so here, here's a young, ambitious, smart guy just out of the best school in Scotland, art school, and he gets pulled into this. So it was a cruel twist of fate, and America gets Robert Scot. He sailed to America, which was colonies there, 1774. That, at least by that time, could have been a little bit earlier. I had my last bit of research. I paid $480 to the British government to look at all the ship records of the period. There were a number of Scots, no Roberts, and a lot of the ship records just had the number of females and males. So that will probably never be known, but he was there by late 74. I think he did have an axe to grind from his treatment in prison, and also that part of Edinburgh was influenced by Jacobites, some lingering influence there, and they actually tried to stop some of the immigration. There were so many leaving from Edinburgh to the United States to join the cause. He embraced the American cause right away, as reflected in his engravings. This is his second design, and this is the radical Virginia seal design that shows basically a monarch with a crowd upside down, broken chain, a whip being stomped on. Sic semper tyrannis, thus always to tyrants, and it's still in use, the Virginia seal. The lettering is fantastic, different forms. You got the English roundhand script, you got the Gothic, very well done. And the figure is just a small space there, so he didn't really have a lot of space to show his talent. He did this from 4 years in mostly Fredericksburg, Virginia, 1776 through the 79. And the last couple of years he moved to Richmond, Virginia, because the capital had moved to Richmond, and that's where all the activity was for engraving eventually. He meets up with Governor Thomas Jefferson in 1780. And Jefferson requests Indian peace medals from Scot. These are huge. I saw one at Colonial Williamsburg, 73 millimeters, almost double the size of a Morgan dollar. These are cast. They had no screw press capable at that time of doing anywhere that size. And it was a lot of time. This is the only silver one known, and it didn't surface until 2011. It was sold at Stacks, I think $109,000. There's other 5 or 6 known in bronze, and they were apparently made for non-Indian chiefs as collectibles. The obverse was an existing design. Again, the lettering it could have been off a U.S. Mint coin, and that's back in 1780. He did a great job on the lettering. This is his 1778 version of the Virginia seal, and it's pretty worn, so you don't really get to see the detail. It shows a broken chain, the inverted crown. Jefferson liked it. He said the workmanship was extraordinary good. And it's interesting that before that information came out in the Jefferson papers, I was in the second edition in the 90s. It was thought that this one would engrave a lot later because numismatists thought that there's nobody capable of 1780 in the United States of making a metal of that quality. Well, Robert Scot did. And I on a previous presentation, I asked what the earliest metal, this is not the earliest metal made in the United States, I'm sure, but it is one of the earlier ones of very good quality for the time period. Let's see, I need to get the menu off because whoops. Scot moved to Philadelphia by April of 1781. Benedict Arnold had traded to the British side by then, and he sailed up the river there to Richmond and proceeded to burn the town. The 1,500 soldiers against 200 militia, they didn't have a chance. And they burned everything, including certainly Scott's shop was burnt, and it was just in complete disarray. And he shows up in Philadelphia with an ad in the paper, I think in April and May, saying is here. And one of the first thing he engraved was for Robert Morris. And Robert Morris was superintendent of finance at the time, and some people say finance for American Revolution. Well, it's not the whole thing, but he did issue some Morris notes, and Scot engraved those. And part of the purpose was for the buildup, the Allied forces at Yorktown. 14,000 troops surrounded Yorktown, and Washington came in from the north, and Greene from the south, and the French from the river. And Cornwallis didn't have a chance. He was a British general, and the battle didn't last too long. They took, I think, 7,247 prisoners and 840 sailors as prisoners. And there were other skirmishes after this for a year or two, but this basically ended the War of Independence because the majority of their army in America were prisoners at the time. Right after the battle, Major Sebastian Baumann surveyed the battlefield, and he wanted to record it. He knew the historical importance of it. Contracted Scot, took Scot 4 months. This is the actual size is about 20 inches long and 14 inches wide. It's huge. It's the biggest thing he did to date. And it shows all the artillery positions, generals, and so on. It's dedicated to General George Washington. And then a description of the battle, which I'll show close up. And I'm just in awe every time I look at this. It's just incredible, I think, the quality that he put into this. It shows George Washington headquarters and all the detail there. It's where they laid down their arms in surrender. And a factual description of the battle that is still used by historians as a factual description of it. The Great Seal of the United States. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. There was an excellent book called Eagle and Shield, written by a couple of government historians in this, I think, 76. and yeah, part of the bicentennial. And they basically attributed Scot as a person who engraved the original seal die, which is in the upper middle there. But it was not a full attribution. They had concern that, well, his coins don't really look like this eagle. And that's how it was supposed to. That was a final drawing by Charles Thompson, and obviously the engraver put his 2 cents worth in there. I have 3 engravings here that the authors of that book did not include, and I think that puts their concerns to rest. The first is the eagle, and this was for a realization of Ezekiel's vision. It definitely is an eagle. It was engraved within a few months of the Great Seal die. The shape of the wings, the curvature of the neck, shape of the head, everything is very close to the Great Seal. The borders are the same. This is the same year for the College and Wilmera seal that Scot did, same borders. And of course, the star pattern. And nobody else in America ever engraved stars like this at the time period, except for Robert Scot. And it's actually a very complex engraving. He always used 6 pointed stars. The 2 opposing points are in a linear axis, and I think it's easier for him to fabricate those, the punches, and they're very easy to align in a pattern. He always aligned his stars in a pattern on coins and everything else. It was never a random, as this drawing shows. So I give him a full attribution. I think the engraving he did for Yorktown really made him popular with American officers. And this engraving of George Washington, the bottom kind of explains what happened there. It was done from original painting or picture by Peale at Mount Vernon. So apparently Scot went to Mount Vernon and did a pencil drawing of this and took it back to the shop and then engraved it for whoever wanted to purchase it. And it's for American standards, it's very well done. Europeans, yes, they were better at portraits, but in America, that's good quality. 1784 map of the United States based on the Treaty of Paris. This is actually the second map of the United States, and Abel Buell did the first map about 8 months earlier. This is from Captain William McMurray, and he did a lot of surveys and collected a lot of surveys as they explained in it, and it's much more accurate than Buell's map. And as soon as this came out, the sales of Buell map dropped off, and Scot's was the map to have for a few years at least. And this inset is pretty shows what is known of the United States at the time to the Mississippi, and then what is unknown, all the western expanse of land. And I think that gave the leaders and everybody who bought this kind of an indication of what was out there. That led to the Louisiana Purchase and other westward expansion motives. Scot advertised quite a bit in newspapers, a lot actually, and that's another way to build a trail of what he did. Before the book was published, I had multiple projects in every year that he worked on, and that's basically when I knew my research was mostly done, when I had all that every year filled in from 1775 to the day he died. This is one of his advertisements of that map I just showed, Captain William McMurray. And it's interesting, from the house of Robert Scot. And he had just gotten married a couple of years earlier to Eunice. And no doubt she was helping out with some of the greeting of customers there and so on. Right in the center of action, second and Chestnut. And there's his logo. And the bottom line says, "Wanted an apprentice." By 1785, he had a lot more work than he could handle by himself. And he actually trained at least 5 apprentices before the mint. Society of Cincinnati. This was a group of officers of the American Revolution that formed after the war. And this is a book that Scot engraved what is known as a frontispiece for them. And this was a consolidation of the society diploma, and the diploma actually came from an anonymous drawing, which I think Scot could have been involved with or did. But I think he had a little bit of fun. The symbolism is just incredible here. You got the eagle, you got the clouds and a raised flag, fame blowing a trumpet of victory. You got the American eagle, bald eagle, shooting lightning bolts at the British lion and chasing Britannia back to England. And I think he had some fun here with the lions hanging on his tongue. And one other interesting thing with this is there's an oval here in the eagle, and it has some lettering in it. And I can only read that with a loop. And in my book is about life size. It's only about 6 inches tall, the entire engraving. And there's lettering in Latin for the Society of Cincinnati. And he had to have used magnification to engrave that, which I will show on the next slide. About 1786, he started converting from working for the military officers to publishing of illustrated books in the United States, and he was an early leader in that. This happens to be at the time period 1788, the largest scientific book ever published, illustrated scientific book with 25 plates, which he engraved. And I got that from an advertisement. These are unsigned. In 1790, they would have a federal copyright law, the first one that allowed them to reproduce British publications. Before that, and maybe that's why he didn't sign it. I don't know, but this is excellent. I was in college, obviously, a long time ago, and I took technical drawing. And then at Boeing, 36 years, especially the last 5 years, I was a technical fellow, and I instructed people on how to read tooling drawings and engineering drawings. And I can tell you, this is fantastic. It looks, it may not appear it until somebody tries it, but the shapes of the ellipse and the circles and everything is just very well done. Shortly after that book was published, he teamed up, and that previous book was published by Thomas Dobson. And Dobson went ahead to do this encyclopedia, and it was the first one published in the United States. And it was a copy, essentially, of the 3rd edition of the Britannica. They had some American articles on the Revolution because the British didn't give an accurate portrayal of it, and also the Native American Indians, they did articles like that. Anything that pertained to America, it was enhanced by American editors. And Scot made this happen. Without Scot, which he had partnered with Dobson on the previous book, he would never have the confidence to do this. This is huge. 21 volumes, over 500 engravings. Scot did by far the largest number of engravers. There are 18 engravers to finish this, and Dobson himself increased the number of engravers in Philadelphia just to have the output of this work. And again, it's the skeleton there is very similar to what his instructor did, and you could look back at Richard Kruper's engraving, very similar, and the style is very similar. And this is also technically extremely well done on these mechanical models of the solar system for people who thought the world was so flat. I guess there's still a few of those. He and Scot engraved independently 129 by himself of these, and with his 4 apprentices, it was over 250, and more good stuff here. And this aerospace at the time, of course, airport started out as an aero station. You got a balloon coming in for the landing there. Interesting stuff, and very high quality of an engraving. It's on copper plate, of course, and this is 2-dimensional, whereas coinage would be 3-dimensional. He had less experience in 3-dimension. Seals get closer, and the one metal, but most of his work was copper plate before the mint. The mint. He was appointed to the mint in 1793, and I think most people know here that there were 2 engravers actually at the time that he was Joseph Wright. They intended him to become, he was the engraver, and I think they had plans to appoint him and create the office of the engraver. It didn't happen. He died of yellow fever. Henry Voigt was the other engraver, and by the Coinage Act 1792, he was required to be an engraver. Said the coinage engraving will be performed by one person. Not the best. That was just not practical. There was just too many coins, too many designs, and they needed to create an office of the engraver, which they did with Scot, and they intended with Joseph Wright, but it didn't happen. So his first original die, and I won't have time to go through the die making process, but it starts with the original die of just a central figure there. You know, if it's a eagle, and it would be an eagle on the reverse. And from the original die, a hub is raised in relief, and the hub is used to impress a number of working dies. So this is his first one. It's obvious a copy of the cent that was previously engraved. And then later in the year, this is actually the half dime, and they did the dollar and the half dollar. They actually struck them in late 1794. This is possibly the dies were made in late 1794, but the half dimes were not struck until March. But you can see the similarity there. The facial features and the scale is roughly the same, and they remove the cap and pull. And that was a political move because the worsening relationship between France and the United States at the time. French Revolution, there was a lot of disagreements. There was going to be the XYZ affair and the Jade Treaty implications. And at that time in 1794, it was just a worsening relationship. In 1795. I'm going to start with the gold here. I spent a little bit more time on this slide. The drape bust, and Scot did engrave all the drape busts. The gold, if you notice, there's a drapery there, and that is the first usage of drapery on United States mint coinage, and that gives it a classical look, kind of a classical profile, long hair. Basically a well-regarded design, and I think nobody questioned that it was Scot who designed and engraved this, of course, with approval of the director, and that was kind of at the time Rittenhouse was leaving, and de Chaussure was the second director, was coming on board, and this is an eagle, but the half eagle is first. July 31st is when it was struck. So let's go to the silver, and I can't really explain this without mentioning a great new book that is out by Harry Salyers, who is a longtime editor of Pennywise for early American coppers. Eagle Poison, A Bank of Clouds, which is a book of the early silver dollars, drape bust, small eagle, 1795 to 1790, just a short series but highly recommend the book because it explains a lot of other things that people need to know about the mint and about the politics, and debunked. Gilbert Stuart and Anne Willing Bingham had nothing to do with a great bust. It was a fabrication. It was a fable. 42 pages of research that I counted that he did, multi-pronged. I don't question it. I thought he really looked into every angle that he could. It didn't happen. So what did happen? This line here, and I'm going to throw a little bit of conjecture here. I think that first of all, John Eckstein, who is that? He was a world-class sculptor who did all kinds of things in Europe and Great Britain and Germany area, and he happened to move to the United States and Philadelphia in 1795. Amazingly, and somebody of that caliber, of course, Scot and the director would have known of that. And I don't think that they gave Eckstein a blank slate. And the reason I say is there's quite a bit of similarity in the drapery and the shape and so on. So I think that Scot created a concept approved, of course, by the director, and an American concept. And Eckstein had done a exhibition just in June on wax models, on paintings, and so on. Of course, Scot would have known about it. The artistic community is fairly small in Philadelphia. And the director, DeSacher, would have probably known about it. So who went to Eckstein? Well, I think it could have been both of them. I think the emphasis does go a little bit more to Scot because the evidence of modeling that I showed earlier, Scot could have done models. He had done them in the past. So why did he go to Eckstein? Well, Eckstein was one of the best in the world. He did plaster models, life and death masks of people, including Frederick the Great. And he just had a tremendous reputation and was among the best in the world at it. So they went to him with a concept drawing, and in my opinion, to finish the concept and make it into a perfect model for the great bust, which I think it is. It was money well worth paid. And what are the differences? Well, it long hair, but there's more curls. It looks more defined and detailed, kind of a flat area there of the upper chest, and this is more three-dimensional here. And I think Eckstein really added the three-dimensional effect of the great bust that made it just a fantastic design. One of the most well-regarded designs produced by the Mint. And of course, the copper is a little bit different, but it's the same basic design. And I had mentioned in my book the accuracy that he had in reducing these, especially the silver, through 5 different denominations. It was just amazing. No reducing lathe. And part of my training in technical drawing, we had to, back then before CATIA, we had to reduce drawings, expand there. And there's a fairly simple method, a grid method, and I'm sure that's what he used. And that was also shown in a couple of excellent articles by Bill Eckberg recently in Pennywise. He graphically showed overlays that, he was good, real good. Heraldic eagle. So they dropped small eagle, and Scot was not that great at eagles as early attempts, and I believe that's because he didn't have a good model to draw with, to base it on. So the heraldic eagle, again, I had mentioned the worsening relationship with France. Now was almost a full-scale war, and a lot of the politicians believe we were at war. Essentially, we were. It was an undeclared war, the quasi-war with France. They had seized over 300 ships and a lot of the public, there were riots, public upheaval. A lot of the congressmen thought we were going to a full-scale war, and some of them thought that would be the best thing to do. Fortunately, they did not. These are revenue stamps, and I brought this into numismatic with my book, and this was not described before, at least in the numismatic world. And this really explains why they went to the heraldic eagle. You see the $1 here, Vermont. These are existing dies. Of course, the image is reversed. And they have a full set of 15 dies at the Vermont Historical Society that were given to them in 1902 in a fitted box. It's got a burlap top to it, which I'm sure was soaked in oil or wax. And these are still in, I mean, they could use them today. Again, notice the position of the arrows pointing in the direction of eagle's head. That is a wartime direction. Because essentially they were at war. These were done started in mid-1797. The director at the time, Boudinot, had started a little bit earlier on the quarter eagle and made the change there. The quarter eagle was a small mintage and able to do it easier on a small coin to start with. And it spread to all the by 1798, it was in all the denominations there. This also was in support just after the Quasi-War, was the first Barbary War. That was with Barbary states, including Tunisia, that were, again, seizing American ships and holding the prisoners and sailors hostage, using them as slaves. You know, so these use the same master dies, the $50 and the eagle. It's good, and you can look at the JRJ, the 2007 I wrote an article that defines all the usage of the die changes, and even in the Aubers die, this was the second hub used on the drape bus, and it's breaking up there. Probably a heat treatment, thermal shock, and when that happens, weak point of the steel is the grain boundary, and the die will crack along the grain boundary within the lattice structure of the metal. The peripheral cracks you see, those are stress cracks from essentially metal fatigue. But this is one of the favorite ones. It's also an overdate, probably the most visible overdate in American coins. More on the revenue stamps. They continue. There are two series of them in that time period. One was for the Quasi-War, and these were to build ships. They didn't have a navy to fight the French initially, and they needed to raise revenue, and they had trouble with raising the whiskey rebellion. That didn't work too well, so they reverted back to these revenue stamps, and these were completely accepted by the public. And they raised over $1 million in the first two issues, 1798 and 1800, and that built about 25 ships that allowed successful endings to these wars. With France, it was a truce. With Tunisia, they basically invaded Tunisia with the Marines and the ships, and they surrendered in 1805. When they surrendered, it would go to peacetime, and that's where the air placement changed. You see it on the $4 revenue stamp pointing towards the head. And in the 1807 coinage design, it's the opposite. It's now in a peacetime position. So it wasn't a mistake, as so many people said. Scott didn't know what he was doing. It was, if you look at the stamps, you'll see the purpose of what the stamps were made for, and that's for the two wars, undeclared wars that they were fighting. Okay. before I get into his death, so John Reich was hired as assistant engraver 1807 to 1817. He resigned because of his eyesight. Scot did everything from that time, from 1817 to 1823, and it consisted mainly of finishing working dies, which didn't require as much work. It didn't require any design work, and it's just punching the letters, but pretty simple stuff. And that's why you see the coinage of that time period, you know, except for there's quite a bit of overdates, but it's really pretty good because they use existing die. But he was getting older. This is his last original die, and he was forced into this because in the quarter eagle, if they had to change it to match the half eagle, and the reverse was the same. Basically, it was done in 1808, but the die probably had rusted, so he started over. The eagle, I thought he did a pretty good job on. Motto was a little bit wobbly. The portrait, the hair and the cap is pretty good. He's starting to, you could tell his age here. It's not quite as good as he used to do. Small coin, low mintage, but 75 years old. He died November 1823, and this is a letter from at the Mint Archives. It's from the director Patterson to President James Monroe at the time, saying it's sad news to tell you the death of our engraver Robert Scot. He had gone to bed on the night before on Sunday and didn't get up for work, so somebody opened the door and he was expired. He also says that there will be no interruption of the mint. I wrote in my book, I thought it was really poor planning to not have somebody come up to speed, because the hubbing process is something that would take some time. And William Neese, it was some years before he did modifications to the designs. The 2012 ANA was held in Philadelphia, and I was there, and I rented a car for a day and went to look for Scott's grave. I had found this in the archives of the American Philosophical Society, which I was researching on the Society of Free Quaker records that they had, and this is the original tombstone for the Scot family. Robert Scot, his wife Eunice Scot, and daughter Sophia Scot, who is 10 years old. His only record of her life is this tombstone. And they had moved it in 1905 to Audubon, to Wetherill property. And so I about 25 miles from Philadelphia, and I had got some instructions on the internet on how to find the place, because it's not posted, fortunately, from the street, vandals and stuff. And found the trail, spent a couple hours at the cemetery. I couldn't find, about half of these are completely weathered away. So unfortunately, I couldn't find which one of these. I mean, it could be this one, same basic shape, and could be that one over there. I don't know. But the fact is, it is on record that their families were moved, and that's where they now repose are in this cemetery. This is his death record. It's interesting that these forms were created in 1780s. I have no doubt that Scot did these forms, and I probably should have put it in the register of engraves in my book, and I did not for some reason. It's not signed, but anyway, it shows that he died of a hydrothorax, and I won't elaborate on that. And $12 to open the grave and bury him. He was a member of the Religious Society of Free Quakers, who were rejected by other churches for their support of the American Revolution. He was not a Quaker, but they included other people from other religions, just people who supported the American Revolution, basically, known as the Fighting Quakers. So to summarize, he Scot contributed immensely to early American material culture through his artistry. His patriotic iconography inspired rebellion, unity, and liberty in the American Revolution and beyond into the U.S. Mint. He led the growth in illustrated Enlightenment books, namely the encyclopedia and the scientific books, and that provided a foundation of knowledge to pave the way into the Industrial Revolution. I think that has been understated. The encyclopedia, I'm trying to get a word count, it was at least 10 million words. Incredible volume of work, and an incredible amount of books that he published engravings for. His coinage design, Scot's coinage designs, portrayed America as a strong, defiant, and sovereign country founded on the principles of liberty, forging an authoritative expression of national identity for the United States. Give credit to whom credit is due. And that's a quote from Samuel Adams. And Robert Scot was an excellent engraver. And a couple of his enduring designs, the Great Seal and the current Navy Seal, the Scot design coin, and my book. And just a shameless plug here, it's second printing now, which is a print on demand. I think the least expensive is on Amazon, free shipping, and so Barnes & Noble is also the same through online. I don't think you can get it in the stores, but you can get it online there if you don't want to do a deal with Amazon. But it's important stuff, and it's completely different than what you've read in Taxi and Breen and other sources about Robert Scot. He was an excellent engraver, and he contributed a lot to the United States. And at this time, I'll open it up for questions.
All righty, we're going to get the lights turned back on in the room here. Okay, so William, I'm going to have you go ahead and stop your screen share. At the very top of that window, there should be a red button that says stop share.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, and let me get this set up on our end real quick. All right. So if you are watching online, you're welcome to send in questions through the Q&A. It's at the bottom of that Zoom window. There's a button that says Q&A. You can type them in there. I will read any off anonymously, so you don't need to worry about that. Otherwise, for anyone in the room, do we have any questions? That's a no. Okay. All right, then I'm going to give everyone online a few minutes to get something typed in. Okay, we do have one in the room.
Well, no, I was just going to convey, love the talk, and about the earliest coining in the Americas. You might take a look at Betts 400 and 401 that were metals coined in 1756, 1757 in Philadelphia, and they are absolutely superb. So they had a striking methodology there.
All right, did that come through all right on Zoom?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
All right, we do have one online. Can you elaborate at all on the cause of Scot's death? I hadn't heard of the term you had used before.
So I asked a few people what hydrothorax is, and I didn't get a clear. I think it could refer to a lot of things. If I was a doctor, I could explain it a lot better. But basically, you know, he had worked until he was 78 years old, and walked to work, apparently about a half mile from work. And the only thing that is explained is that the cause of death is hydrothorax. And apparently when they opened the door to this room, he wasn't, he was dead at that point. If there's a doctor in the house, maybe they explain is that, you know, water on the lungs or some congestive heart failure. I I'm not sure. I'm sorry, I can't help you anymore with that.
All right. Is there anything in the room? Okay, just be sure to speak up so the microphone picks you up.
Yeah, just more of an observation. You know, today in the mint, everyone's very specialized. They just work on coin, work on metals. And in this period, you know, not just Robert Scott, but Christian Gobrecht and others worked in a whole bunch of different mediums. They were copper plate engravers, seals, book covers, all sorts of things. They had to be real generalists.
All right. You touched on this some, but just to reiterate, in case some people online missed it, do you have copies of your book available?
I do not have any. I've saved 15 copies I want to get them leather bound in case there never is a hard copy. I don't have any for sale currently. If somebody wanted to get a signed copy, I think they could go through you or Len and possibly arrange it. I have done that before, but I don't have any personal copies for sale anymore. The first, I had 200 copies, and except for those 15, it sold out. And of course, American, the new issue is print on demand. And I would say that the first printing, the picture quality is a little bit better, and it has a few more typos. So the typos are correct in the second printing, but the pictures are not quite as sharp.
If anyone is interested in a signed copy and wants to talk to us or William about that, you're welcome to go to the symposium website. It's nnpsymposium.org, and the contact us page. Just send in a message on that page letting us know, and we'll see if we can figure something out.
There's one question from the presentations yesterday, Mark Borkart, that I think I need to provide clarity, if that's okay. And somebody asked that, you know, it was Scott moonlighting when he went to the mint, and I don't think that's a very good way to describe it. He owned an engraving partnership with a total of 5 engravers by 1794, and it was mainly for the encyclopedia, which George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and a lot of the founders subscribed to, and so they all knew it. There was no conflict of interest. And he did that for a few years and really did very little engraving. Some years no engraving for that. And I think 1800 was the last year he did engraving. And then he just licensed some of his copper plates after that. So it was fully, everybody knew it, and no conflict of interest. And the founders wanted his publications.
All right. We do have a clarification from someone watching online who seems to know more about medical situations, saying that the cause of death could be any fluid in the lung space, could be a complicated infection, heart failure, or perforation. So hopefully that clears that up.
Thank you.
Is it possible for a JRCS member to purchase a leather-bound copy of your book? And if so, how?
Right now, there is no leather-bound copy. As I said, I have saved 15 for that purpose. And I've talked with the publisher, American History Press, about a hard copy edition, and it's sort of in work, but it depends how sales are going and things like that. He has to make money, I don't. So I won't have a leather-bound issue for at least a couple of years. I want to find out if they're going to have a regular hard copy edition come out.
Right. All right, then that was the last one in Zoom. So if you are watching online, send in any last minute questions. Otherwise, is there anything else in the room? Nope. All right, then I will go ahead and wrap us up. And if anything comes in the meantime, we'll get back to that at the end. Otherwise, thank you all for watching. All of the presentations in this room are being recorded. Those recordings will be available about 2 weeks from today on the NNP. If you are registered for the symposium, which everyone watching online should be, then you will receive an email when those go up. If you are here in person and would like to receive an email when those are available, you're welcome to register for the symposium. There is a QR code and a link on both of these signs. It is entirely free and takes about 2 minutes on your phone. There will also be an announcement on our website and social media when those videos are available as well. So I don't see anything else coming in, so we're gonna wrap it up. Thank you so much, William, for taking the time out to present.
You're welcome.
And
Pleasure.
coming up next at, I believe, 1 o'clock Central, so many time zones, 2 o'clock Eastern, we will have Matthew Tahori talking about an ancient coin discovery that should be very interesting. So thank you all, and hope to see some familiar faces or names back then.
Thank you.